drive our overall economic vision. The power sector reform is at the heart of our industrialization. I call on all stakeholders to cooperate with my administration to ensure the success of the reforms.
It gives you first a diagnosis, it gives you a future view, and in between lays out steps towards accomplishing, and the timelines for constituting the regulator, timelines for constituting the bulk trader that will purchase and buy power and sell power, timeline for setting up the liability company that will manage legacy liability, and all those timelines. So it's clearly articulates what should be done.
To underscore the seriousness the government attaches to the reforms, the entire process is being carried out under the guidance of the Presidential Action Committee on Power, which is headed by the President and Vice President themselves. Its fastidious implementation has become one of the most critical issues to Nigeria since the Civil War.
The reform process as it is now, I do have a lot of belief and hope, basically because all the various participants in the sector are under this umbrella of the PACP, even inclusive of the customs, the police, secretaries of the government of the Federation, the Bureau of Public Procurement, the Bureau of Public Enterprise, NERC, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Finance. So all those things have been put in place together to make sure that the reform process goes along very well.
Between now and the next decade, Nigeria has got to rebuild its entire electricity infrastructure. It's a huge project on a scale that this country has never faced before. As one engineer put it, it makes launching a satellite into space seem like walking down to the corner shop to buy a soft drink. For the average Nigerian, it's not even comprehensible on a scale of anything that's been done before. And yet, it must be done.
As far as I'm concerned now, it is the only way forward. Because, you see, whether we agree or not, yes, people say government has a lot of money, Nigerian government, because we're an oil-rich nation, yes, and gas, yes. But we equally have other competing sectors of the economy which also require money from the same purse. And some of these sectors, unlike the power sector, are not privately viable.
We need to create a trusted system, a system that provides confidence to investors. And that's what reform is about. Yeah? Providing that degree of confidence for Nigerians and foreigners to bring their money to become partner in delivering power.
At the heart of that new and trusted system is privatization, the super gun with which the government of President Jonathan hopes to turn electricity from a remote curiosity into an essential tool for modern life, the driving force that will power Nigeria's long-awaited technological and economic revolution.
He has set up the strategy very clearly, and it is going to be driven by private sector. So if the power is going to be driven by private sector, the government's role is only to facilitate, regulate and facilitate. And therefore private sector, because it's putting money, investment, it wants to get it going quite quickly. So we, for the first time in Nigeria, are seeing real reforms and real action and possibility of results quite quickly.
The Bureau of Public Enterprises, or BPE, is the government agency charged with overseeing the privatization details of the electricity system.
Our objective at the end of the day is really to move away from state ownership and move into private ownership so that you can have the kind of efficiencies that you require to actually take the sector to the level that you want it to go.
Under the plan, the existing thermal generation stations, such as the older Ebin power plant near Lagos, as well as the new stations built by the government under the NIPP scheme, would all be privatized and sold. But the hydro stations, such as the Shiroro power plant in northern Nigeria, would be available for concessioning only.
The generation companies, you have two classes, thermal power plants and hydro power plants. The thermal power plants will be privatized similarly, except the states won't participate in that. But the hydros will be concessioned, and the concession would be because of water rights. You don't actually sell water rights to the private sector. I mean, you can concession private sector to use water in a certain way, and so that's what's happening there.
The distribution companies located in Nigeria's major cities have also been slated for privatization.
There are 11 distribution companies that will be privatized. And let me just say that privatization doesn't mean 100% transfer of ownership to the private sector. It actually means that in the case of discos, that the federal government will reduce its ownership to minority stake. The states will now come in and become part owners of the distribution companies. The workers will have a small share of the distribution companies. The private sector will take majority stake in the distribution companies. So all these people will be part of the company.
For an investor who is ready to roll up his sleeves and hit the road running, he will have some bit of interesting times, because once he can improve on his losses, which potential exists, to do technical loss improvements as well as commercial loss improvements, then that gain becomes a potential for the investor as well.
The government would also retain control of the country's transmission system, though the plan is to bring in a management contractor to run the transmission company.
It will continue to operate as a government entity. And the reason why that is being done is because Nigeria is still a developing country, and we need to be able to take power to places where the private sector may not feel it's economically viable to take power to. But the management of the transmission system will be private sector, and just to ensure that there is quality and the same kind of consistency as, say, the generation and distribution companies.
We've actually been quite excited about the response that we got. Even the road show, was encouraging. We went to about 5 different countries, and there was a lot of response, and it reflected in the expressions of interest that we got, because we got 331 expressions of interest. Interest has come from across the world, Asia, Middle East, America, Western Europe. It's across the world that we've actually had interest.
Most international analysts agree that the process of privatizing electricity in Nigeria is encouraging. The government appears to be holding bidders to strict standards. Each one of them must come up with a demonstrably clear investment and implementation plan of how they intend to overhaul the electricity system.
Our evaluation process was quite specific as to what we were looking for. We said we want technical operators. We want people who have actually operated power plants, who have operated distribution companies. That's first and foremost. And then we want people who have also strong balance sheets and have the capacity to muster the kind of financing that we will obviously require for these transactions. This is critical for us because we define success not only from the point of view that we sell the enterprises, but also from the point of view that after selling, they're able to actually get off on their feet and move.
I feel Nigeria is going to get the investment that it needs. We are expecting that to get to the level of 40,000 megawatts by 2020, Nigeria will need about $50 to $60 billion of investment over that period. There will be no problem. I've talked to investors. There are a lot of investors who are willing to put money onto Nigerian power because they really see returns.
I remember, for example, when after the GSM auction happened, and people were saying Nigeria has one of the lowest teledensity rates in the world. How realistic is it that within a few years you're going to be able to get to 10, 15 million subscribers, which people at the time thought was extremely unlikely and very ambitious. Yeah, in a few years we're now at 80 million or 75 million subscribers. So the sky is the limit.
The high degree of regulatory certainty that came when President Jonathan appointed a new internationally credible regulator in 2010, as well as the political stability emerging from the president's victory at the polls, was the turning point for many international investors.
Our approach to regulation is actually to only intervene when it's possible. We believe that the market should kind of supervise the transactions that are necessary, but the regulator should set the setting, and especially in the two areas, in the area of rate making and also in the area of performance management. So what we've done is to provide all the technical and legal framework so that the independent power producers, the distributors, everybody have clear certainty as to what their obligations are, and they are clear about how they're going to recover their investment.
There is considerable hope now that finally they're going to bite the bullet, for example, on the price. They've divided up the companies between transmission, distribution and generation companies. The big challenge is going to be to ensure that the distribution companies are able to collect revenues from customers.
At present, Nigerians officially pay 8.5 naira, or around 50 cents per kilowatt hour, arguably one of the cheapest rates in the world. But in reality, because they're not actually getting enough electricity, they're paying among the highest prices on earth, buying diesel for their generators and kerosene for their cookers.
Unless consumers pay more, the service will never improve. And those customers who use generators at the moment are already certainly paying more in reality than would be true with a service that worked with a realistic tariff. So we feel that consumers will have to give the government a chance on this and be willing to pay a realistic price for electricity.
As more independent power producers come on board, Nigeria's policymakers are confident that, similar to what happened in the telecom sector, consumers will be able to choose from different customized packages, making prices more competitive. When they finally flip that switch and the light stays on, it'll be one of the most satisfying feelings ever. But are customers willing to pay more for it?
Well, if it's going to improve the supply and the increase is not much, I wouldn't mind.
Customers have to pay more, because if you draw more, you must pay more. But it is better for them because the other option is to generate their own power, which is actually very expensive.
When the price goes up, and initially probably the service doesn't actually improve, customers are going to be perhaps rather reluctant to pay a higher price for a service that remains the same. So it's going to depend a lot on the trust that develops between privatized distribution companies and at the other side, the generation companies who are buying gas and buying fuel, and whether the generation companies trust the distribution companies to pay for the electricity they're generating.
And that's where the government-appointed bulk trader comes in.
Now, the distribution companies in Nigeria are not creditworthy. So you need a creditworthy and off-taker who will support and provide a guarantee for the generation company and the distribution company. So he would sign the agreement between the generator and the distribution company and said, the generator generates electricity. I'll buy the electricity from you and I'll give it to this person. And I assure you that I have the money.
That assurance would be strengthened by a partial risk guarantee from the most trusted banking institution on earth, the World Bank.
Instead of waiting 5 years and see, so to speak, this framework being established and firmed up, you can come in now and we're going to guarantee that we're going to continue on this path. So I think the World Bank has been willing to work with the government of Nigeria to, you would say, build that kind of comfort package in terms of partial risk guarantees to enable investors to commit funding early on in the process instead of adopting a wait-and-see approach.
So the impact of the partial risk guarantee, which the World Bank is offering, is that it's an off-balance sheet kind of intervention. And essentially what it assures the generating company is that if it supplies its power, there's a letter of credit that will kick in if there's failure or default in payment. That's essentially what it is. And that's what the World Bank is offering us.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has also thrown its considerable financial weight behind the reforms by providing low-interest loans to commercial banks specifically aimed at investors in the power sector.
We've put together a fund that will provide low-interest, fixed-rate, long-term money to power plants that want to participate in this process. We'll basically be lending to the banks at 1%, and the banks can on-lend at a maximum of 7% for periods of up to 15 years. And that will be for projects that are in any of the critical areas of the power reform.
With Nigeria's central bank and the World Bank providing transparency checks and guarantees on the processes of the reforms, it's greatly restored respect in a sector that's been seen as dysfunctional for years. The government has also adopted a pragmatic policy that empowers states and private companies to become involved in electricity generation and distribution. Lagos State is one of several states that have taken advantage of this policy. Tonight, Governor Fashola is commissioning the first of a series of independent power projects in Lagos.
Now, this facility gives us the opportunity now to fully power the Lagos High Court, to fully power the JIC Taylor Iboshere Magistrate Court, to fully power the General Hospital, to fully power the Lagos Island Maternity Hospital, and to power at least 20 streets on the Lagos Island at night.
The project, right from the scratch, is just a partnership between Lagos State government and my company, which is Negris Limited, an indigenous power plant in Nigeria. It's a kind of public-private partnership involving the states and private individuals coming together to achieve a goal, and the goal is what you see yesterday, the commissioning of the whole project.
The biggest of the independent power projects is this 650 megawatt combined cycle power station at Afam in Rivers State, which has been built by the Shell Petroleum Development Company.
I must say that we got into that power plant purely as a way of identifying with the aspiration of the government of Nigeria to improve the power situation in the country. You will know that normally the power business is not our business. However, as a corporate citizen here, we felt that power is something that this country needs, and we rose up to the challenge. The power reform has given a substantial enabler to new independent power producer. I think the entire power environment is now different with this power reform. So I think the situation is right for people who want to invest in power.
Though it's fully exploiting Nigeria's abundant natural gas reserves, the roadmap for reform has also paved the way for alternative means of generating electricity. One such method is wind, a great source of renewable energy and one that is unlikely to run out. Here in Lamborimi, Katsina State, a 10 megawatt wind farm pilot project is nearing completion.
It's the first project of this kind in Nigeria, where we are talking of renewable energy. We want to generate electricity using the natural resources we have in this country. And it's sited in this part of this country because we have sufficient wind that can generate this energy.
The wind farm plant consists of 37 turbines, which, when fully functional by late 2011, can each generate 275 kilowatts of electricity, enough to power several local villages.
Of course, it is a very positive aspect of whatever programs the government is ushering in the power sector, because it brings about diversification of energy sources, and it makes it possible for us to really go into technologies that can be easily domesticated. By that I mean technologies that you can actually manufacture a bit of the components locally, apart from being able to assemble them and install them.
Another crucial alternative to the energy mix in Nigeria is coal, reserves of which abound in many parts of the country. Here at Itobi in Kogi State, an indigenous Nigerian firm is working with foreign partners in the construction of a 1,200 megawatt coal-driven power station.
Not advisable for countries to depend on one source of energy, because should something happen, that means then you don't have anything. So it's good to mix it up, and we are quite optimistic that renewable energy in Nigeria is going to be part of the answer.
The government has also approved the construction of a clutch of giant hydro plants around the Mambila Plateau in Taraba State, a longer-term project that will take at least a couple of years to complete.
The federal government has since entered into a serious discussion and beyond discussion to agreement with the Brazilian government on the Mambila Plateau project. The Mambila Plateau water project, which is hydro, when completed, has the capacity to produce well over 4,000 megawatts of electricity.
In addition to attracting international investors and diversifying Nigeria's power source, all these energy projects are also providing unique opportunities for local companies to become major players in Nigeria's electricity sector and to partner with more established foreign firms.
We have our partners, business partners, Nigerian partners, and we also some Nigerian engineers, technicians, and workers, laborers. So we're trying to work well with them to make sure our challenge can be resolved.
And the significance is that we now know how it is done in other places, and we can take from there and do it on our own in future.
For the first time in a long time, you find there are new companies being set up to take advantage of the opportunities in the sector. So clearly, you see that power entrepreneurs are beginning to come up, and energy entrepreneurs are beginning to come up. And even for the professionals who have tended to work in various other sectors, they're beginning to look at the sector and beginning to want to play.
I, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan.
Inauguration Day, May 29, 2011. As President Goodluck Jonathan is sworn in for a new 4-year term, most Nigerians who have witnessed the dramatic transformation of the telecoms industry as a result of privatization want more than anything else a similar revolution in the power sector.
If in 4 years, if Jonathan can achieve the power sector reforms, for me, he will be a hero.
Mr. Goodluck owes me just 2 obligations. Number 1 is electricity, and number 2 is sound education. I think if you can give me that, then that means my vote was not wasted.
It's a problem that every Nigerian is facing. Every Nigerian. So let him do more on electricity.
I'm happy that they should not take light.
The President and his deputies are clearly determined to end the power crunch that for years left homes and businesses groping about in perilous darkness. But there are outstanding nettlesome issues, not least labour demands for greater compensation and concerns about how the privatization process will affect thousands of power sector workers.
And those were part of the major problems that we had, because
If you had agreements that were not implemented, there's no way you go into some other projects. The people concerned will be saying, on these agreements will stand. So those are some of the issues we want to clear.
For decades, successive military governments ignored opportunities to expand capacity in Nigeria's power sector, and warnings that the system had become grotesquely outmoded. The consequences of those years of neglect can be seen today in the economic ravages that besmirch Africa's most populous country.
I will continue to fight for electricity to be available to all our citizens. You have trusted me with your mandate, and I will never, never let you down.
The dream of the Jonathan administration is that Nigerians must march together into a new, brighter, more industrialized future. Without regular electricity supply, the path of that industrial march will remain ill-defined, and Nigeria's passionate dream of becoming an economic giant by 2020 at best vague. But for the first time in decades, there is a market-driven, internationally acknowledged blueprint for power sector reform in place. And as it rolls on, the hope and the bet is that this time, the mission of transforming Nigeria's power sector for the better will prove to be very successful indeed.